Montana Territory, July 1873. The girl came out of the trees barefoot, blood on her dress and panic in her eyes. Rhett Lawson reined in his horse so fast the gelding reared. He dropped from the saddle, boots hitting dirt just as she stumbled and fell. She pushed herself up with scraped hands, but her legs gave out again. "Do not touch me," she gasped, voice hoarse, staring up at him like a trapped animal. "I will not," Rhett said gently, kneeling a few feet away. "You are hurt." She blinked hard, trying to steady herself. "I did not kill him." "I swear on my mama's grave." Rhett glanced behind her. No one followed. The trees were still. "Who says you did?" "The sheriff. And the man's brother. They came to hang me this morning." Rhett took in her torn dress, the way her hands shook. She could not have been more than 20, maybe 22, but her eyes had seen too much. The kind of pain that settled in a person's bones. "What is your name?" he asked. "Marable Warren." She pulled herself upright, one hand braced on a pine trunk. "I did not mean to run here. I just kept going, and now you are on my land," Rhett said. "And you are safe." Her chest heaved, suspicion and disbelief warring on her face. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," Rhett said. "You are scared. You are bleeding. And you are not going anywhere on that leg." She wavered, then sank down hard onto the dirt. "I did not want to die for something I did not do." "You will not," Rhett said, already taking off his coat. "Not here." Rhett took her back to his ranch house, a good half-day's ride from the nearest town. Marable slept most of the first 2 days, feverish and quiet. When she woke, she tried to leave again. "I cannot stay," she said, standing barefoot in the kitchen doorway. "They will come for me." "They will not find you here," Rhett said calmly, stirring the beans on the stove. "And you are still limping." "I can manage." "You could not make it 1 mile." She slumped into the chair, folding her arms tight. "I should not have come this far." "You did not have a choice," Rhett said. "Now you do." She looked up at him. "Why are you helping me?" Rhett met her eyes. "Because whatever happened, you do not deserve to be hunted like an animal." She held his gaze a long time. Then she said, "He tried to take me. The man I killed, I told him no, he did not stop. I picked up a lantern." Rhett's jaw tightened. "Then you defended yourself." "They do not care I do," Rhett said. Something shifted behind her eyes, a crack in the wall. By the end of the 3rd week, she was helping in the kitchen. Quiet, watchful, but steadier. Rhett never asked more than she was willing to give. But he listened, always listened. "My mama died when I was 15, she told him one night as they shelled peas on the porch. "My uncle raised me. He drank, he owed money, sold me off to that man like I was a mule." Rhett's hand stilled. "You were not his to sell." "I ran the first night, but I did not get far." Rhett reached for her hands. She flinched. "I will never hurt you," he said softly. "You can leave tomorrow or next spring or never. But I will never make you stay." She looked at his hands, then slowly placed hers in his. Her fingers were calloused from work, his rough from years on the land, but they fit. A month later, the sheriff rode onto Rhett's land with 2 deputies and a notice nailed to a board. "Fugitive woman," he said. "Name's Marable Warren. Killed a man in Cold Creek. You seen her?" Rhett leaned against the post rail, arms crossed. "No, she is dangerous," the sheriff said. "Pretty little thing, but we have a witness says she did it." "You hang every woman accused by one man," she ran. "That is guilt enough." Rhett's eyes narrowed. "If I see her, I will let you know." They rode off at sunset. Marable had watched from the loft of the barn, heart pounding so loud she could hear it in her ears. When Rhett came in, she was sitting on the hay, knees pulled close to her chest. "I cannot keep hiding," she whispered. "You could get killed for helping me." "You are not just anyone," Rhett said. "You are Marable Warren." She looked up, tears in her eyes. "That does not mean anything." "It does to me." He knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I have money, land. A name folks trust, she shook her head. That will not stop them. Rhett took her hands in his. But a marriage might, her breath caught. What? If you are my wife, they cannot take you, they cannot arrest you without coming through me, and they will not. You would marry me, knowing all this. I would marry you because I want to, Rhett said, because I trust you. Because I have never met anyone like you. Marable stared at him, heart pounding. I do not have anything to give. You gave me peace, he said. That is more than I ever had. Her eyes filled and she nodded once. Then yes. They married in the small clapboard church outside Miles City, just the two of them and the preacher. Marable wore a plain blue dress, Rhett's mother's brooch pinned at her collar. When the preacher said, "You may kiss your bride," Rhett pressed a hand to her cheek and kissed her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered, because she was. Back at the ranch, Rhett showed her the deed with her name on it. "It is yours now, too," he said. Marable traced the letters with her fingertips silent. "You are safe here," Rhett said gently. "You are mine to protect now." She looked up at him, tears glimmering. "And you are mine." He smiled, then leaned down and kissed her slow, his arms wrapping around her waist. For the first time in years, Marable felt like she could breathe, and she knew she was not running anymore. The summer turned dry and long, dust clinging to windowsills and gathering in the corners of the ranch house, like it had a mind to settle there for good. Marable swept it away each morning, her movements steady, her eyes outward, as if watching the fields might tell her something she hadn't yet learned about this new life. Rhett had taken to rising early and returning late, the cattle needing more water than the creeks could give. He came home with sunburn across his neck and a quiet set to his shoulders. At night, he ate what she made, and they sat by the fire without filling the air with more than what was needed. One evening, after a day thick with heat, Marable stood in the doorway holding a wet cloth to her face. The orchard behind the house gave a rare breeze that stirred her hair. "You ever think of selling?" she asked without turning. Rhett tipped his hat back, leaning against the porch rail. "This land's been in my family near 30 years. I was born in that back room. I figured you might want something easier," she said. "No one would blame you." "I don't mind work," he said, "and I don't need easy." She folded the cloth and turned toward him. "You don't say much about yourself. You don't ask much. I'm asking now." He sat down on the steps, elbows on his knees, eyes on a patch of dry grass where the chickens liked to dust. "My pa died when I was 16. Fever took him fast. My ma went quiet after that. I took over the herd, got good at it. Folks around here think I came into money. Truth is, I bled for every acre." She came down the steps and sat beside him, skirts brushing his leg. "You don't carry it like a man who bled." "I carry it different, maybe," he said. "Doesn't mean it's not there." They watched the last of the sun slip down behind the ridge. Marable reached up and pulled the comb from her hair, letting it fall loose around her shoulders. Rhett didn't look at her, but she felt the shift in the air between them. "What's it like?" she asked softly. "Knowing where you belong," he glanced at her then. "You think I always knew. You seem sure." "I only started knowing the day you ran out of those trees." She didn't speak, just let her hand rest on his, fingers threading through without hesitation. That night, she didn't go to the small room at the back of the house. She followed Rhett into the front bedroom instead. He lit the oil lamp, and the soft glow fell across the wooden walls and the quilt she'd mended just days before. When she stepped inside, he said nothing, only set the lamp down and waited. "I dreamed last night," she said, "that I was still running. I woke up with my hands clenched." "You're not running anymore." "I know," she said. "But sometimes my body forgets." He reached for her then, slow and certain, and she let herself fall into the circle of his arms. No words passed between them. They didn't need any. In the weeks that followed, she planted herbs in the kitchen garden. She asked about the names of the horses and memorized which saddle creaked and which gate stuck. She stitched new curtains from old bolts of calico and hung them herself. Her presence filled the house like music that had always been waiting to be heard. One morning, Rhett came in from the barn with 2 fingers wrapped in cloth. "What happened?" she asked, guiding him to the wash basin. "New colt took a bite at the rail, splinter caught me." She unwrapped the cloth, examined the wound, then went to the pantry for a jar of salve she'd made from bee balm and lard. "You made this?" he asked, surprised. "In Cold Creek, I worked for a midwife. She taught me what could heal and what could harm. Said women needed to know how to save themselves. She'd teach you to stitch, too, in all the ways that matter." He let her work in silence, her hands gentle but firm, and when she finished, he lifted her wrist and pressed a kiss to the inside of it. That afternoon they rode together up the ridge behind the north pasture. From there, the land seemed to roll on forever, golden and wide under the hot sky. She stood beside him, wind tugging at her skirt. "You ever think of what comes next?" she asked. He looked at her, the corners of his eyes crinkling in thought. "You mean after the dust settles? I mean after the world forgets my name and I'm just your wife." "I don't want the world to forget your name," he said. "I want it to carry it. Marable Lawson. Strong as the roots beneath us." She reached for his hand. "Then let's make something worth carrying." He nodded once, and together they turned toward the path home, not in any rush. The sun would hold a while longer, and there was still supper to cook, water to draw, and a life unfolding in steady, quiet steps. The first snow came early that year, brushing the tops of the foothills before the leaves had finished turning. Marable stood by the barn with a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, watching flecks of white gather in the seams of the wood. Rhett was repairing the door latch, his breath visible in the cold air, tools laid out with deliberate care. "You ever think the land's warning us?" she asked, eyes on the sky. Rhett didn't look up. "How do you mean, coming down like this before its time, like something's shifting underneath?" He tightened a bolt before answering. "The land tells what it wants to, same as people. Doesn't mean we understand it." She stepped closer, stepping over a puddle that had crusted with ice. "I heard coyotes last night, real close. I'll set the traps farther out." He stood, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. "But they won't come near the house." "I wasn't worried," she said. "Just listening." He studied her a moment. "You've changed." She met his gaze. "You mean I'm not afraid anymore?" "No," he said. "I mean you're opening." She didn't answer, but her hand slipped into his, and they stood like that until the cold pushed them back inside. That evening, while Rhett scraped the last of the wax from the lamp and trimmed a new wick, Marable took down a bundle wrapped in old muslin from the cupboard above the hearth. She laid it open. Across the table, bits of lace, a length of faded ribbon, a scrap of gingham from a dress long gone. "I thought I'd forgotten these were here," she said, smoothing the wrinkled cloth. "But turns out I just stopped looking." Rhett sat down beside her. "What's the ribbon from?" "My mama's Easter bonnet. She braided it through the brim herself. I used to think she looked like a storybook." "Hold on to that," he said. "Not many things worth remembering stay so clear." She folded the bundle again with care, then looked at him. "You ever think about children?" His answer came without hesitation. "Yes." She nodded once, letting the words settle between them. "I wasn't sure if I could after what I came from, what I did." "You didn't do wrong," Rhett said, "and nothing about your past would keep you from raising something good." It took her a moment to speak. "If it's a girl, I want her to know she can say no and be believed." "She will," he said. "She'll have your fire." "And your steadiness," she added later, when Rhett banked the fire and Marable braided her hair by the window. He said, "There's a man in town, Harlan Ditmore. Sells brass fittings and talks too much, she raised a brow. And he mentioned a judge might be passing through next month. Circuit court might be a way to clear your name. She turned from the window. You trust him? No, Rhett said. But I trust the law to bend when pushed hard enough by the right man. She crossed the room and stood before him, her voice steady. If it's done, it's done. I've got nothing left in Cold Creek. I don't need anyone to forgive me. It wouldn't be for them, he said. It'd be for you. She didn't answer, but her eyes softened, and she touched his cheek with the back of her hand before blowing out the lamp. The next morning, she saddled her own horse for the first time since arriving. Rhett watched from the fence line, arms folded. She mounted clean, reins firm in her grip. I'm riding to the far pasture, she called. Check the north gate. Take the rifle, he said. I'll be fine. He nodded but didn't stop watching until she disappeared over the rise. By dusk, she was back, cheeks pink from wind, a small tear in her glove. She handed him a feather she'd found caught in the fence wire. Owl, she said. Might mean something, could mean anything, he said. She smiled, the corner of her mouth lifting just enough. Or nothing. That night they sat quietly, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters, but inside the walls held firm, and the silence was the sort that asked nothing and gave everything in return. They didn't speak of the judge again that week. They didn't need to. Some truths lived best in the spaces between words. The judge arrived on a cold morning in early December, his wagon creaking to a halt outside the post office in Miles City, wheels glazed with frost. Word spread quick through town, the way important things always did, quiet as a match struck in a dark barn, but sure to catch. Rhett heard it from a cattle broker on the west side of Main Street while trading for winter feed. He returned to the ranch with his coat collar dusted in snow, a slip of paper in his pocket bearing the date and time of the judge's hearing. Marable was mending a tear in the ticking of a grain sack when he came in. She glanced up at the sound of the door. He took off his gloves and set them on the table. He's here. She tied off her thread and laid the needle aside. You want me to go? I want you to be free. She looked at the floor, then back up at him. What if freedom is this? This house, these days with you. Freedom's knowing no one has a claim on you but who you choose, he said. Even if that's me. She stood and crossed the room slowly. Then I'll go. They rode into town together 3 days later. The snow had held off, but the sky wore a woolen gray and the wind cut low along the ground. Marable wore her heaviest shawl and the gloves Rhett had bought her from a trader who passed through from St. Louis. The courtroom was no more than a back room above the mercantile, warmed by a single stove and crowded with townsfolk who'd come more out of boredom than concern for justice. The judge, a lean man with a stiff collar and a hawk stare, sat behind a desk with ink stains on his cuffs. Marable sat straight, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't look at the faces gathered, only at the man she stood to meet. You understand what's being reviewed here today, Mrs. Lawson? The judge asked. Yes, sir. You've been accused of the unlawful killing of one Thomas McClary, formerly of Cold Creek. I have. You do not deny that he died by your hand? No, sir. The judge leaned forward. Then what is your defense? She looked him full in the face. He came to me in the night. He had no right to. I told him to leave, he didn't. I struck him with what was near. I didn't mean to kill him, but I meant to stop him. There was a hush. Someone shifted on a creaking bench. The judge said nothing for a long moment. Then, was there a witness? No, she said. Only me. Rhett's voice came from the corner. And me now. The judge turned. You weren't there. I wasn't, Rhett said. But I've known this woman day in and day out since she came to my land. I've seen the way she carries what happened. That kind of truth don't lie quiet. The judge studied him, then looked back to Marable. You ran. I had nowhere to go, she said. No one to believe me. He tapped the desk with his pen. And now, she glanced at Rhett. Now I do. The judge sat back in his chair. The law's no perfect thing, but it should answer to reason. I see no cause to drag a woman through trial for surviving. He signed a slip of paper and handed it to her. This clears you in the eyes of the court. What you carry beyond that is yours alone. Outside, the sky had lightened just enough to show pale sunlight behind the clouds. Marable stood on the boardwalk in silence, the paper clutched in her glove. Rhett stepped beside her. You feel different, he asked. I thought I would, she said. But I don't. That's all right, she turned to him. But I might tomorrow, he nodded. Then let's wait on tomorrow. They rode home as the sun broke through, slanting gold across the frozen grass. The silence between them wasn't heavy, it was full. When they reached the house, she dismounted slow, boots crunching on frost, and looked up at the chimney where smoke curled steady into the evening air. Inside, she set the paper in the drawer where she kept her ribbon and her mother's keepsakes. Then she reached for Rhett's hand. Let's build something, she said. He didn't ask what. He only pulled her close, forehead touching hers, and said, We already are. By late January, the stillness had settled in. The kind of stillness that comes only in the deepest part of winter, when the land lies blanketed and the world seems pared down to only what matters. Marable moved through the house with a quiet rhythm now, her steps sure, her hands steady. She had begun sewing in the evenings, nothing fancy, just practical things for the baby she hadn't yet told Rhett about. She found herself pausing more often, fingers pressed to her side, feeling that strange, fluttering presence that made her breath catch. It wasn't time, not yet, but it would be. And he needed to know. Rhett came in from the barn near dusk, carrying a length of rope and smelling of cold wood and horses. She waited until he'd hung his coat and poured water from the kettle into the basin before she said, I've been keeping something from you. He turned around, drying his hands slowly on a rag. Go on. She stepped closer to the hearth, where the firelight caught the edges of her shawl. I wasn't sure I could carry life after everything, but I am. He looked at her for a long moment, the rag still in his hands. Then he crossed the room in 2 steps and dropped to his knees before her, pressing his forehead against her middle. You sure? He asked quietly. I've known for weeks. She trailed off. I wanted to hold it close a while. His arms circled her waist, and he stayed like that, head bowed as if listening for something only he could hear. That's the best thing anyone's ever told me, he said. She let her hands rest on his shoulders, her voice a little unsteady. You're not afraid? I've been alone most of my life, he said, rising slowly, but now I've got you. And now I've got this. That night, he brought in cedar branches to lay over the fire and cooked her eggs and salt pork without letting her lift a hand. She watched him from the table, one hand resting on the soft swell beneath her dress, and thought how strange it was that a man who barely spoke more than he needed could make her feel more known than anyone ever had. When February came, the storms did too. One lasted 3 days without pause, snow piling high against the windows. They passed the time together, him whittling spoons from scrap wood, her weaving tiny booties from leftover yarn. Once, when the wind howled hard enough to rattle the stovepipe, she looked up and said, You think this house will hold? He didn't pause in his carving. It held before you, and it'll hold after we're gone. But right now it holds us. She smiled slowly, brushing her thumb over the soft yarn looped around her fingers. That's enough. It wasn't all easy. There were mornings she couldn't stand the smell of the kitchen, and nights she woke from tangled dreams, breathless and sweating. Rhett never asked questions she didn't want to answer. He just sat with her, sometimes taking her hand, sometimes not, but always present, as steady as the land beneath them. In March, they hitched the wagon and rode out to the old cottonwood grove on the far side of the property. She'd mentioned once, passing through it, how the trees reminded her of something from her childhood but hadn't said what. He remembered anyway. "I thought you might want to see them again before the baby comes," he said, helping her down from the wagon. "They're taller than I remembered. Everything looks smaller when you're little," he said. "But they're still here." She walked between the trunks, her gloved fingers brushing bark, and said, "I used to think trees like these were watching over us." "Maybe they are," he said, standing behind her. She turned to him, her cheeks flushed, and said, "I never thought I'd be someone who got to grow old with another." He took her hands, kissed each knuckle. "You are." They stood there until the wind picked up and she leaned into him, her body warm against his. By late spring, the house shifted again. Rhett built a cradle from pine planks, carving a small wildflower into the headboard. Marable stitched a quilt for it, each square from pieces of their life: his old cotton work shirt, her faded blue skirt, the flannel from the coat he'd worn the day they married. When the baby came, it was early morning, and the sun had just started to warm the frost off the windows. Rhett held her hand through it all, his face pale but steady. When the cries came, they were strong. "A girl. You choose," Marable whispered, exhausted but smiling. "Clara," he said, "for the light she brings." Marable nodded, her eyes closing as he placed the baby against her chest. That night, Clara slept in the cradle beside the bed, and Marable lay with her head tucked under Rhett's chin. "I used to wonder," she murmured, "what it would feel like to belong somewhere." He didn't answer right away, just held her tighter. "Now I know," she said. He kissed her temple, voice low. "So do I." Years passed. The ranch grew, slow and honest. Clara learned to walk beneath the same cottonwoods her mother once feared she'd never live to see again. Rhett taught her to ride before she turned 6. Marable taught her how to listen to the land, how to make salve from wild mint, how to speak when it mattered and stay still when it didn't. They grew older, but not apart. The quiet between them never turned cold, it only deepened. And on the porch, in the long light of summer evenings, Marable sometimes reached for Rhett's hand without a word, and he'd squeeze once like he always had, and everything that needed saying passed between them in that one small gesture. They had known fear. They had lived through storm and silence. But in the end, what they built stood taller than anything that had tried to break them, and it held. Always.